Donate your car and get the highest possible tax deduction with Vehicles for Change. Go to vehiclesforchange.org for complete details. Welcome back to Inside PressBox. We'll be joined by 105.7 The Fan's Saturday afternoon talk show host Gary Stein in just a couple minutes. But first, the Orioles drew over 18,000 fans to last Saturday's FanFest. But just before the event started, news spread of the sudden passing of Earl Weaver at the age of 82. A bittersweet mood today at FanFest. Of course, the fans optimistic about 2013, celebrating 2012, but the news that Earl Weaver passed away is running through the crowd.
It's a sad day, but then it's, you're at a great place, FanFest, and to be here, and I guess it's sort of apropos that it happened. And
it's almost like a big wake for Earl.
Yeah.
Made me cry. I tell you, I remember my dad got such a kick out of Earl Weaver when I was little, and we would come to Memorial Stadium and tell me about the tomato plants out in the outfield. He just loved him, so I was mourning not only Earl, but my dad as well. It just brought back so many memories. We loved Earl. He was great.
When you think of Earl, you think of Baltimore. Yes, we think of Brooks, we think of Frank, but he was the man that led them. He directed them, he orchestrated all the wins, and it's very sad loss for Baltimore.
He was so fiery, and he would fire up the team when that happened. He'd come over and start arguing, and they'd throw him, and they'd come back and often win the game.
If you had one memory of Earl Weaver, what? And I went, bing, go.
Emmett Ashford, umpire. When Earl turned his hat and threw it on the plate and kicked the dirt all over him. Best memory I ever had of Earl.
Turning the hat around backwards, kicking up the dust, running down, pulling the bases out. Just makes you smile every time.
I remember his last game in Baltimore when he got to ride around in the car and just being able to see the happiness he knew that the fans felt for him, but that happiness that he felt that he did something for us. And that's probably the biggest memory I'll have of Earl.
Does this bring back memory for you?
Yeah, that brings back Was it special that last year he really seemed to celebrate the team's resurgence?
I said to my son, thank God he made it through all the ceremonies. He was at every one, as far as I remember.
I think it meant more to him than anybody. I think it meant more to him than Cal and Frank and Brooks. And I just think Earl lived his life. I think Earl was Earl.
He had such a profound impact in our lives. He led us to a world championship, 6 division titles, 5 American League pennants, colorful figure who just dominated the Baltimore sports scene. And I remember his famous arguments with the umpires, turning his hat around backwards, getting nose to nose, make sure he wouldn't get thrown out because he had his hat wrong. He was a classic, and he's in the Hall of Famer, and I'm just grateful that statue was designed. He could live to see it done.
Hey, one thing he did when he did his radio show, he did his show. In other words, he didn't have, the first year he had Tom Maher interview him, but then he would write the show and record it himself.
Right, also there's a famous recording of him and Tom Maher off the air that we can't discuss.
About the tomatoes. And joining me right now is an old friend and compatriot from my days in radio talk radio, Gary Stein, who next week will be right in the middle of the action at Superdome. We welcome you to the show, Gary.
It's happening.
And Earl Weaver. Fans could not be, they're sad, but you can't talk about Earl and not chuckle.
Well, and I'll tell you a quick story about him, too. I used to work for the Orioles back in 04 and 05.
That's right, yep.
So they on opening day, they would bring back, a lot of the greats. Earl, Jim Palmer obviously was there, and just to mingle with the corporate sponsors. So I have 2 kids, my son, my daughter, they're about the same age. At that time, they're about 10 and 11 years old. So Earl's there, and Earl's all of 5'3".
Yep.
My son's about 10 years old. He's about 5'2". So, well, that's actually not true. He's probably like 5 feet. But anyway, so I said, oh, Mark, you got to meet Earl Weaver. So I bring the 2 together, and they're literally like looking eye to eye at one another. And I say, this is the Orioles, former great manager, World Series, Hall of Famer, all that. So, hey, how are you, Mr. Weaver? I've heard so much about you. It's all good. Earl goes away. My son turns to me and he goes, that's Earl Weaver? He goes, Dad, he's about as tall as I am. Said it takes all kinds.
Hey, somebody else we both got to know a little bit passed away, and I mentioned it in my interview with Mike Gibbons. Before we get into the game in the next break, we'll talk about this Super Bowl. Your thoughts about Art Modell and any special memories around the Super Bowl season of 2000, 2001, or anything in general about Art?
Well, I mean, the special memories about 2000 was it was just so unexpected.
Yeah.
We were such a young franchise, and we only had 1 year under Billick. The first year 8-8 was obviously better than the first 3 years under Marchibroda, but it just took everybody by surprise, and it was so great. And it's actually fairly similar to what happened this year. Yeah. I mean, I don't think we were quite as surprised, but the downslide that the Ravens took late in the year, and then the upswing from that. As far as Art, it's funny. He always asked about my kids too. Art and I had back in '96 and '97. Art was Jewish, and he's got a Holocaust past, and my dad did too. And so we kind of got talking about that. I don't remember how we started talking about that, but we did. And he always asked about my father, and he always asked about my kids. And that just goes to show you the type of man that Art Modell was. He was a lot more than football. He was more personable than professional when it came to stuff like that.
I feel the same exact way. It's a good anecdote about Art Modell. When we get back, Gary Stein and I are going to talk about the game coming up next week, Super Bowl 47, what he'll be doing, and how he thinks the game will play out. We'll be right back. Inside PressBox is presented by Friedmont Mortgage. Don't make a 30-year mistake by choosing the wrong lender. Go to Friedmont.com now for all of your mortgage needs.